I woke up this morning with divine blood under my nails. I don't know which god it came from. I don't know how many I killed last night. All I know is that when I looked in the mirror, my eyes shone with the light of dead stars, and whispers in forbidden languages echoed inside my head. They call me a tomb desecrator, a grave robber, a madman dancing over the bones of the divine. But they don't know the truth. They don't know that 15 years ago, I didn't choose this life. It chose me. Dead gods scream the loudest when you wake them. The awakening. My name was Marcus Reeves. Was. Now I'm just a shadow of the man I used to be, a hollow shell filled with fragments of murdered deities and memories that don't belong to me. Marcus was an archaeologist. Marcus had a wife named Sarah. Marcus slept peacefully, untroubled by the voices whispering coordinates of lost cemeteries in his dreams. Marcus died the first time I touched a divine tomb. It all started in Ashworth Cemetery in Salem. Sarah had disappeared 3 days earlier, just went out for groceries and never came back. The police didn't believe me when I said she was being called by something unnatural. They only saw a desperate husband spinning conspiracy theories. But I could feel her. In my dreams, she walked among gravestones glowing with a sickly light, following a melody that only the dead could hear. By the third sleepless night, the visions became unbearable. I saw Sarah descending a black marble staircase leading to catacombs that shouldn't exist. I saw creatures with countless eyes watching her as she approached a sarcophagus covered in symbols that made my eyes bleed just to look at them. Desperation is just love that has lost its fear of consequences. I ran to Ashworth at 2 a.m, armed with nothing but a flashlight and the arrogance of a man who still believed in logic. The cemetery was ancient, founded in 1672, when Salem still burned its witches and whispered about demons in the woods. I found the staircase exactly where my vision had shown me, hidden behind a mausoleum inscribed in a language older than Latin. The steps descended deeper than should have been physically possible, as if the earth had been dug down to touch hell itself. I went down because I had no choice. Each step echoed like a funeral bell, and the air grew heavier with every meter, thick with something my mind refused to name. At the bottom, I found Sarah. She was alive technically, breathing, her heart beating. But her eyes, my God, her eyes were black holes devouring all light around them. She knelt before a sarcophagus made of pure obsidian, chanting in a language that made my bones vibrate in harmony. Some people don't disappear. They're collected, Sarah whispered, but she didn't respond. Her hands moved over the lid of the sarcophagus, tracing symbols that ignited with a cold fire at her touch. That's when I realized I wasn't alone in the chamber. Dozens of others knelt in concentric circles around the sarcophagus. Men, women, children, all with the same hollow eyes, all chanting the same hypnotic melody. And at the center, carved into the obsidian in letters that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly. Here lies Veltar, the Star Devourer. Sarah lifted her head and looked at me with those impossible eyes. When she spoke, her voice echoed as if it came from a cavern deep beneath the earth. He's waking, Marcus. After 1,000 years of sleep, the collector is awakening, and we are the keys that will open his prison. The first collection. The sarcophagus lid exploded outward, as if struck by lightning. Sarah and the other worshippers were thrown against the walls, their bodies colliding with nauseating cracks of breaking bones. But they kept chanting, even with blood spilling from their mouths. What emerged from the obsidian was not divine. It had never been divine in the way humans understand. It was older, hungrier, more conscious than any deity humanity had ever worshipped. Veltar rose like a column of liquid night, eyes portals to the void between the stars. When it spoke, the words didn't reach my ears. They imprinted directly onto my soul. 1,000 years. 1,000 years since I tasted fresh divine essence. I understood then. Veltar was not a forgotten god. It was a predator that fed on gods, imprisoned by deities long gone, sealed in an obsidian prison and kept asleep by rituals performed by select families across generations. But the families died. The rituals were forgotten. Veltar had spent decades planting whispers in the minds of their descendants, calling them to complete its awakening. Sarah hadn't disappeared. She had been summoned. Some legacies are curses disguised as destiny. You're probably wondering why you can see me clearly while the others just follow the whispers, Veltar said, focusing on me. You must be curious why your mind hasn't shattered like the others. I looked at Sarah, coughing blood but still chanting, tears freezing on my face. Because you have the gift, Marcus Reeves. The same gift your ancestors used to imprison me. The ability to see beyond the veil, to touch divine essence without being consumed immediately. The entity moved closer, sucking the heat from the air around me. Your ancestors imprisoned me. How poetic if your descendants are the ones to fully release me. That's when I felt the chains, not physical. They were something subtler, infinitely stronger. Tendrils of destiny and purpose wrapped around my soul like serpents of ice. You will serve me, Marcus. You will travel to forgotten cemeteries and awaken dormant gods. One by one you will bring them to me until I have consumed enough divine essence to break all seals that still partially bind me. And if I refuse? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Veltar gestured at Sarah, who immediately stopped chanting and looked at me with her consciousness restored. Marcus, she whispered, where are we? Why can't I move? She will live while you serve me. But with every god you fail to bring, a piece of her soul will be devoured. Eventually, only a shell will remain, chanting my song like the others. I glanced at the broken worshippers, still chanting, noting that some wore outfits from decades past. Some women in Victorian dresses, a man in a World War I uniform. They had been there a long time, waiting, serving, slowly disappearing. True love is always a form of voluntary slavery. 15 years of nightmares. And so began my life as an unwilling collector. At first, I resisted. I sought ways to break the chains, to find other descendants who had helped seal Veltar. But every attempt at rebellion cost Sarah another piece of herself. First, her childhood memories. Then, her ability to recognize familiar faces. Next, her capacity to form new memories lasted only minutes before fading like smoke. I learned quickly that obedience was the only way to keep any part of her alive. Veltar sent visions in my sleep, coordinates of ancient cemeteries, images of specific tombs, whispers about which gods lay in each place. I followed the instructions like an automaton, traveling country to country, desecrating sacred sites and awakening entities that had chosen oblivion. Each awakening was a unique ritual. Some gods responded to words of power. Others required blood offerings. Some demanded I solve puzzles left by their last worshippers. But all, without exception, panicked when they realized they weren't truly free. They had been collected. Freedom is just an illusion sold to prisoners willing to work for free. I met Tiamat in a submerged cave in the Mediterranean. She cried tears that turned into black pearls when she realized her awakening was nothing more than a transfer from one prison to another. I found Cernunnos in an Irish forest where he had fused with ancient oaks to escape Veltar's hunt. When I awakened him, the very trees screamed in agony. I unearthed Quetzalcoatl beneath a pyramid in Mexico, buried so deep that his essence had merged with volcanic rock. His awakening triggered earthquakes that lasted 3 days. Every god I collected left fragments of their memories, shards of divine essence clinging to my soul like luminous parasites. I began dreaming of the universe's creation, of wars between forces that existed before matter, of the sound that nothing made when it was first broken. The human mind was never meant to contain divine knowledge. Marcus Reeves was slowly being replaced by something broader, older, more aware of the hidden patterns governing reality. Expanded consciousness is just madness with a better vocabulary. The discovery. In the 12th year, I began to suspect the truth. I was in Tibet, searching for a god demon named Mahakala, supposedly hiding in an abandoned monastery. Veltar's visions had been especially vivid that week. Images of mummified monks guarding secrets written on human skin, rituals that transformed pain into power. But when I arrived, I found someone unexpected. Another collector. A Japanese woman named Yuki, enslaved by Veltar for 23 years. Her entire family had been captured as leverage. Husband, 2 children, parents, all kept in semi-existence while she traveled across the Orient, collecting forgotten gods from Buddhist and Shinto traditions. Solitude is a luxury slaves cannot afford. You see the chains too, don't you? She asked the first night we spent together in the frozen monastery. She spoke English with a heavy accent, but her eyes held something beyond language, the vacant look of someone who had long lost hope. I showed her the ethereal shackles around my wrists, and she nodded bitterly in recognition. He has collectors all over the world, she continued, at least 50 that I know of. Some have served longer than us. Some are newer, still trying to resist the chains. How many gods has he collected? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Thousands, she whispered. He's building something, Marcus. Something that will change the nature of divinity forever. It was Yuki who told me about the repository, the place where Veltar kept all the collected gods. It wasn't physical, not exactly. It existed between dimensions, folded into reality, in a way that only those marked by the chains could access. I went there once, she said, and saw genuine terror in her eyes for the first time. By accident, during a ritual gone wrong. I saw them all, Marcus. Every god we had collected over the years, suspended in dark energy cocoons, slowly drained of their divine essence. And Sarah, the other worshippers from the first awakening, they are the security system. If a god awakens prematurely, or if a collector tries to sabotage the process, they activate as guardians. But each activation consumes more of their souls. Hope is just desperation that hasn't learned math yet. The impossible plan. For 3 months, Yuki and I planned. We traveled secretly between missions, communicating through codes hidden in offerings left at abandoned temples. Slowly, we built a network of collectors willing to risk everything for a desperate chance at freedom. There were 12 of us, 12 slaves of Veltar spread across 6 continents, each held in line by hostages they loved more than their own lives. The plan was suicidally simple. We would all access the repository simultaneously and awaken all the collected gods at once. The resulting explosion of divine energy should be enough to break not only our chains but also the seals keeping Veltar partially imprisoned. It was a cosmic gamble. If it worked, Veltar would be fully freed, but vulnerable, exposed to the combined wrath of thousands of enslaved gods. If it failed, all of us and our hostages would be destroyed instantly. Freedom always costs more than slavery, but some prices are worth paying. On the appointed night, each of us performed the ritual at designated locations around the world. I was back in Salem, in Ashworth Cemetery, in the same chamber where it all began. Sarah was still there, 15 years later, chanting the same song. But now she was more ghost than woman. Closing my eyes, I let the chains pull me into the repository, feeling the presence of the other collectors making the same journey. The repository was indescribable. Imagine an infinite space filled with cocoons of dark energy, each holding a god in forced slumber. The air was thick with unspent power, the ground pulsing with the collective heartbeat of thousands of sleeping deities. At the center floated Veltar, not the Veltar I knew, but its true form, a mass of conscious hunger the size of a small city, tendrils of solid darkness reaching into each cocoon, slowly draining the prisoner's divine essence. Monsters always seem smaller when you see them through masks. Collectors, its voice echoed through dimensions. What a unpleasant surprise. You really believe you can challenge me? No, I screamed. my voice amplified by the other 11 speaking in unison. But we could. Together, we touched the nearest cocoon and whispered the words we had used countless times before. Awaken. The collective awakening. What happened next can't be properly described in human language. Imagine the sound of 1,000 suns exploding at once. Imagine the color of pure divine rage. Imagine the concentrated fury of beings that existed before the first star. All the gods in the repository awakened at once. Tiamat surged from her cocoon like a tsunami of primordial water and maternal wrath. Quetzalcoatl erupted in flames that burned reality itself. Cernunnos grew into thorned vines that spread across the dimensional space. Hundreds, thousands more, all awakening with decades or centuries of pent-up fury. And at the center, Veltar screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a rupture in the fabric of existence. Its roar of frustration echoed across dimensions, cracking the repository's structure like glass under extreme pressure. Vengeance is just justice without patience. The gods turned on their captor like a tidal wave of divine wrath. Tiamat engulfed it in drowning waters. Quetzalcoatl scorched it with sacred fire. Cernunnos strangled it with roots that tore open wounds in reality itself. But Veltar did not die easily. For millennia, it had fed on the essence of countless deities, fat with stolen power, bloated with forces that weren't its own. The battle lasted an eternity, or a second time, had no meaning in the collapse of the repository. Realities were born and died with each strike. Entire universes were created and destroyed as collateral from the divine war. We, the 12 collectors, were at the center, torn and remade every moment by the raw energy unleashed in the conflict. Then I realized the ultimate truth. Veltar hadn't enslaved us merely to collect gods. It had marked us as dimensional anchors for exactly this scenario. If the repository were destroyed, our marked souls would maintain a link to the primary reality, allowing it to escape its dimensional prison and emerge in our world. Every savior is just a traitor who hasn't yet paid the right price. As the gods battled, my consciousness was pulled in 12 directions, each fragment carrying pieces of Veltar back to Earth. The other collectors were going through the same process. We were dimensional doors forced open. In seconds, Veltar would materialize in the physical world, free of its prisons, bloated with millennia of stolen divine essence, and utterly enraged. Humanity would be annihilated in hours. There was only one solution. With the last fragments of my humanity, I reached for the chains connecting me to Veltar, and instead of breaking them, I pulled them inside me. I absorbed the entire dimensional connection, all the energy binding me to the entity. The other collectors realized what I was doing and did the same. 12 people, transformed over years of exposure to divine power, voluntarily became living prisons for a cosmic entity. The process killed us, of course. But death is just a state transition when you carry divine essence in your soul. What remains? I woke up 3 days later in Ashworth Cemetery. Sarah was truly dead this time, her soul finally free after 15 years of torment. Her last conscious act had been to whisper thank you before dissolving into golden light. Veltar still exists inside me. I can feel it stirring in the darkest corners of my mind, a hungry, furious presence whispering terrible promises whenever I sleep. The chains haven't disappeared, they've just changed purpose. Now they hold it trapped inside my soul. The other 11 collectors spread across the world, each carrying a fragment of the entity. We communicate through shared dreams, a network of involuntary guardians keeping the cosmic predator in eternal imprisonment. Some victories are indistinguishable from defeats, except that you're still alive to mourn them. And the gods we freed. Some returned to the world, taking new forms and finding new worshippers. Others chose true oblivion, scattering their essences across the cosmos, never to be collected again. A few even thanked me before leaving. Tiamat blessed me with the ability to see through any disguise. Quetzalcoatl gave me the gift to understand all languages, dead or alive. Chernunos marked me with protections that keep other cosmic predators from detecting me easily. Useful gifts for someone in my position. Because you see, Veltar isn't the only one of its kind. There are other collectors out there, other entities that feed on divine essence. Some have learned from Veltar's mistakes. They are subtler, more patient, more careful in choosing their servants. So now I do the reverse. I travel the world looking for new collectors, people who've started dreaming about forgotten cemeteries, inexplicably drawn to abandoned sacred sites. I try to warn them before it's too late. Sometimes I save them. Sometimes I arrive too late and find only another soul enslaved, working for a hungry predator. And sometimes I encounter something worse. The final hook. Last week, I received a letter. Not delivered by mail, it simply appeared on my nightstand, written in ink that glowed like divine blood under moonlight. The letter said only, "Dear Marcus, your little rebellion was inspiring. We appreciate innovation in our collection methods. We would like to make a business proposal. Sincerely, the consortium." Attached to the letter was a photograph. It was a 7-year-old child playing at a playground. Brown hair, toothless smile, a doll clutched to her chest. A completely normal child, except for one thing. She had my eyes. The eyes I gained after absorbing divine essence for 15 years. Eyes that glow like dying stars in the dark. On the back of the photo was a message in golden ink. She is developing the gifts. Soon, she will start having the dreams. What a shame if someone finds her first. The consortium. So now you know why I wake every morning with blood under my nails. Because there's something inside me desperate to escape. Something whispering that the only way to protect a child I barely know is to unleash a monster I spent 3 years imprisoning. Parental love is just another kind of chain, but some chains are worth wearing. And the worst part? Part of me has started listening. Because you see, Veltar may be trapped in my soul, but it still whispers, and lately, its whispers have started to make a perverse kind of sense. "Free me, Marcus," it murmurs during sleepless nights. "Free me, and I will destroy the consortium before they touch your daughter. Free me, and I will turn every one of them into cosmic dust. All you need to do is stop fighting the chains. Stop keeping me trapped. Let me out for just one night, long enough to protect what is yours." And the terrible truth? I'm considering its offer. Not because I trust Veltar. Not because I believe it will keep its word. But because sometimes the monster you know is preferable to the monsters you don't. And the consortium, my God, what I've discovered about them in the past weeks makes Veltar look like a domestic pet. So tell me, readers, if you had to choose between freeing a cosmic predator trapped in your own soul or letting even worse entities capture and corrupt an innocent child, what would you do? Because I have exactly 72 hours to decide, and the chains are growing weaker with every passing hour. Sometimes being a hero means becoming the villain someone else needs. The chains are singing, friends, and for the first time in 3 years, I am singing along.